The second I walked into the private dining suite at the back of the restaurant, I knew my mom had lied to me. This wasn't brunch. The lights were too bright, the white tablecloth had no plates or menus on it, and in the center of the table sat a thick stack of documents next to a heavy black pen, neither of which belonged to me. A man in a suit was already seated, laptop open, watching me instead of the door. My mom smiled like this was perfectly normal. "Maya, good, you're here. We just need to talk about what's fair after your dad's passing." I'm 28, I work remotely in product design, and I handle enough contracts and online tools to recognize a setup. But knowing what's happening and being ready for it are different things. Nothing prepared me for the moment she introduced the stranger as her attorney and slid those papers toward me. In explaining they were an agreement to restructure my inheritance so that everyone could share. Her lawyer pushed the document across the table. My mom folded her hands like a judge, and everyone else in the room stared at me as if I'd already done something wrong. "All you need to do," the lawyer said, "is sign. Then we can transfer a portion of what your father left you into a shared family account, for the good of everyone." When I didn't immediately pick up the pen, the mood shifted. The pleasant expressions vanished. My mom's voice got sharper. They started hinting at dragging things out in court, making your financial life difficult, ruining your credit if you refuse to cooperate. My heart was hammering, but underneath the panic, I could hear my dad's voice in my head, calm and dry as ever, while reminding me who had actually followed the law. I looked slowly around the table, then started counting under my breath, and then out loud. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. "There are a lot of you," I said. They frowned, confused, and that's when I finally smiled. "Funny," I added. "I only brought one person, too." If you want to hear who walked in next and how this little family brunch turned into the worst decision my mom ever made, you have to understand how we got to that table in the first place. I wasn't always the woman calmly counting heads in a private room. Most of my life, I was just a kid from a quiet suburb outside Austin who thought family meant board games, big box store runs, and my dad's awful jokes about how there's no place like 127.0.0.1. My dad, Tom, was a senior systems analyst for a regional telecom company. He was the kind of man who packed leftovers for lunch, compared electricity plans for fun, and drove the same dented Toyota for 15 years because it still gets me from A to B. My mom, Angela, hated that. She wanted the gated community, the spotless SUV in the driveway, the resort vacations she could post on social media with captions like "living our best life." She wanted the version of us that existed in her head, not the one sitting at our mismatched kitchen table. When I was 15, the crack between them finally split. They sat me down one night under the humming fluorescent light in our kitchen. My dad had a manila folder of printed bank statements. My mom had a tablet open to a page full of lakefront houses and dream kitchen inspiration. "I'm tired of just scraping by," she said, voice tight. "I'm tired of pretending we can afford something we can't," my dad replied. Texas is a community property state, which meant that during the divorce, the court looked at what they'd built during the marriage and cut it straight down the middle. My mom saw it as her shot at finally upgrading. My dad saw it as losing half of what he'd scrimped and saved, and still walking out with child support and spousal support obligations. After it was final, I lived mostly with my dad in a modest 2-bedroom condo in Round Rock. It wasn't glamorous, but if I cracked my window at night, I could hear the faint whoosh of the highway that led into Austin and smell the rain on hot concrete. On Friday nights, he'd let me pick dinner from an app, and we'd eat takeout straight out of the containers while watching sci-fi shows on his slightly too small TV. He taught me how to use budgeting software, explained what an HSA was, why you never carry a balance on a credit card if you can help it, and how compound interest was the closest thing we get to magic. Other parents bragged about new trucks or granite countertops. My dad bragged about finally paying off the last of his student loans. My mom, on the other hand, moved up to a shiny subdivision north of Dallas and seemed to swap out her entire life in under a year. She married Derek, a charming financial advisor who specialized in wealth management for people in neighborhoods that all looked the same. Suddenly, her social feeds were full of backyard pool parties and wine tastings. She had 2 new kids in her daily orbit, Lily and Connor, Derek's children from his first marriage, and all 4 of them wore coordinated outfits in every holiday photo. Technically, I was still her daughter. In practice, I felt like an occasional guest star on the perfect family show she was producing. Every time I scrolled past her posts, the captions were some version of, "So proud of my amazing family," "Blessed beyond measure." I wasn't in the photos. I wasn't really in the captions either. She didn't call to ask how my AP exams went, or what colleges I was considering, or how I was coping with the divorce. She called to tell me Lily made cheer captain or that Connor's club soccer team was going to regionals. The only time my name came up between my parents was when she called my dad to talk about money. He'd come home from those calls quieter than usual, his jaw a little tighter, but he always bounced back by queuing up some old comedy and making popcorn on the stove like we were having a party instead of patching cracks. On weekends, we'd hike the Greenbelt or drive out to state parks for cheap day trips. He'd point at the $1 million houses on the hills and say, "People obsess over those like they're tickets to happiness. They still go to bed with the same brains." He kept our life small, but it never felt lacking. It felt honest. On nights when I cried about the divorce and asked if it was my fault, he'd sit at the edge of my bed and say, "You don't owe anyone your future just because they share your last name, kiddo. You get to build something that's yours." At the time, it sounded like something from a self-help book. I didn't know he was quietly meeting with an estate attorney, changing beneficiaries, and making sure that if anything ever happened to him, I wouldn't be forced to live inside my mother's definition of fair. I thought the worst part of my story had already happened when the divorce was over. I didn't realize that one late-night drive on I-35 years later would take my dad away and turn all those money lessons into a war. When your dad is the kind of person who checks every tire before a road trip and refuses to text while driving, you don't picture car accident as how his story ends. But that's exactly what happened. One rainy Thursday, he stayed late at the office in downtown Austin to deploy a software update. On the way home, somewhere between the city and Round Rock, a driver drifted across lanes on I-35 and set off a chain collision. By the time state troopers contacted me, he was already gone. The world went quiet and sharp around the edges, the way it does when you get news your brain refuses to fold into reality. The funeral was small and straightforward like he would have wanted. A few coworkers, some neighbors from the condo complex, and me, standing near his urn, trying to remember how to breathe. My mom arrived, dressed in black like she was auditioning for a drama series about grieving wives. Derek flanked her, Lily and Connor hovering behind like they'd been posed there. She cried loudly, hugging people she barely knew, telling anyone who would listen how devastated she was. I stood a few feet away thinking, you didn't want this man. You wanted the life he couldn't afford to give you. After the service, while people lingered over bad coffee, a woman in a navy blazer and flats approached me, where she introduced herself as Priya Shah, my father's attorney. We sat at a metal picnic table under a scraggly tree, the smell of barbecue from a nearby smoker drifting over. Priya explained that my dad had been painfully thorough. He'd updated his will more than once after the divorce. He'd been worried, she said gently, that there might be pressure from my mother if he didn't spell things out. That was her polite way of saying he knew Angela would come for his money the second he wasn't there to stop her. According to the will, everything that was clearly his separate property after the divorce, plus everything he'd built since, his condo, his brokerage account, with a bunch of boring index funds and a few tech stocks, his retirement accounts, his savings, came to me. It wasn't billionaire wealth. It was the quiet, solid nest egg of a man who'd made a decent living and almost never spent above his means. I thought I'd feel guilty sitting there as she listed it all out. Instead, I felt this painful mix of grief and pride. He'd managed to protect me from my mother even from the other side of the grave. Priya walked me through the Texas probate process, how the court would validate the will, supervise the transfers, and how anyone who wanted to contest it would need real grounds, not just hurt feelings. "Your dad was very explicit, Maya," she said, meeting my eyes. "He wanted you to have control of your future, without interference." That last word hung between us like a warning. Right on cue, my phone buzzed. It was a long text from my mom. "We need to talk. Your father would want you to think about all of us. We should handle his estate like adults. When can we sit down and discuss numbers?" She did not ask how I was sleeping. She did not ask if I was eating. She asked for numbers. At first, I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. I responded politely, said we could talk once probate was underway, mentioned that Dad had an attorney. She ignored that and jumped straight to, "How much are we talking about, roughly? What did he have in savings? In investments?" When I didn't answer quickly, the guilt campaign started. Long messages about how much she spent on me when I was a kid, how expensive teenagers are, how Lily and Connor would both need help with college. Over and over, "You have to think about the family." By family, she meant her household. I forwarded everything to Priya. She advised me not to share exact figures, account numbers, or documents. Don't sign anything. Don't agree to any side deals. If your mother wants to challenge the will, she can hire her own attorney and file. But based on your dad's paperwork, she doesn't have much. So I chose to trust the woman my father had trusted, even if it meant refusing the woman who gave birth to me. My mom's messages shifted from sentimental guilt to veiled threats. Voicemails about how lawyers are expensive and these things can drag on for years. Hints that my credit could get tangled up if there was a messy fight. She'd toss in, "I'm just trying to protect you," before sliding into, "You don't want this to get ugly, do you?" It sounded like a pitch. Love and menace packaged together. The more I held my line, the more frantic she became. I stopped answering and kept a log instead. Dates, times, summaries. My dad always said, "Money makes people unpredictable. Unpredictable people leave trails." When probate wrapped up a few weeks later, the court confirmed the will. The condo, the accounts, they were formally mine. Priya sent me a tidy packet of certified copies and an email that sounded like a deep breath. Within a day, my mom emailed too. Subject, family meeting. The body was full of phrases like clear the air, explore options, find a fair middle ground. She said it would just be a small group, nothing formal. She booked a nice restaurant in Plano, said she'd reserved a private room so we could really talk. I stared at the screen with that old ache in my stomach. My dad had followed every rule, and still I felt like I was being circled. I forwarded the email to Priya with one line, "Will you come?" She didn't reply by email. She called. "I'll be there," she said. "You're not walking into anything alone. And if your mother wants to put documents in front of you, she's about to find out what it's like when the other side brings a real attorney too." On the day of the meeting, I drove up from Austin with a folder on the passenger seat. Copies of the will, the probate order, my notes on every text and voicemail since the funeral. Priya and I had a simple plan. I'd go in first, see who was there, see what they put on the table. She'd wait at a cafe around the corner, phone in hand. All I had to do was text her one word, and she'd walk over. That way my mom couldn't claim we had ambushed her, even though that's exactly what she was trying to do to me. The restaurant was one of those places with abstract art, soft jazz you can barely hear, or in servers who appear the second your water glass dips below half full. A hostess led me down a hallway to a frosted glass door that said private. My pulse thudded in my throat as she opened it. My mom sat centered at the table in a dark blouse, posture ramrod straight. Derek sat to her right in a blazer and pocket square. Lily and Connor were opposite them next to a man in a gray suit with an open laptop. There were no menus, no breadbasket, just a pitcher of water, 6 empty glasses, and that perfectly aligned stack of paper with a pen on top. "Maya, honey, you made it," my mom said, as if I'd arrived early to help her set up. "We just want to talk." The man in gray stood, shook my hand, and introduced himself as Brian. "I'm counsel for your mother," he said. "We're just here to discuss some options for handling your father's estate as a family." He said family like it was a magic word that made us all equal claimants to what my dad left behind. I sat. The top page of the stack had my full name in all caps, followed by dense paragraphs of legal text, words like reallocation, voluntary transfer, irrevocable. Before I could ask, my mom leaned forward with her practiced, sympathetic face. "Before you freak out, just listen," she said. "Your dad's will, it wasn't written with the reality of our family in mind. Things changed. We have Lily and Connor now. College is expensive. Life is expensive. This is just about everyone being taken care of." Brian chimed in, explaining that the document was a family settlement agreement. If I signed, it would move what he called a fair share of my inheritance into a trust managed for the benefit of the entire blended family. Fair, according to the numbers on the page, was about 65% of what my dad had left me. He said it like someone suggesting I pick up the check. "This time." "You'd still have plenty," my mom added quickly. "Nobody's saying you have to give up everything. We just don't want this to turn into a long, ugly legal dispute. That would hurt your credit, your job prospects. This way, it stays private. Adult." I thought of my dad coming home exhausted from court dates, shaking his head about how messy the divorce had been. I thought of him sitting on the edge of my bed, telling me I didn't owe my future to anyone. I laced my fingers together to keep them from shaking. "So," I asked carefully, "or if I don't sign this, what happens?" The temperature in the room dropped. Derek shifted in his chair. Lily stared at the table. Connor pretended his phone wasn't in his hand. Brian folded his hands, adopting a tone that was supposed to sound reasonable. "Then," he said, "your mother has options. She could contest parts of the probate process. That could cause delays, legal costs, and a public record you probably don't want. It could complicate your access to accounts. And conflict like that can have ripple effects on your financial profile, your credit, your borrowing power. My mom jumped back in. We're giving you a chance to show you care about this family. You're not the only one who lost someone. Lily is touring campuses. Connor has his whole life ahead of him. We're asking you to do the right thing. I looked around the table. A lawyer ready to bill every minute, a stepfather who made a living talking people into smart investments, 2 kids who'd grown up in a world where I was a footnote, and my mother who could cry on cue if it got her what she wanted. How many of you are there again? I asked quietly. My mom's face pinched. What does that have to do with anything? I let my gaze move from face to face like I was counting place settings. 1, I said, nodding at her. 2, at Derek. 3, 4, Lily and Connor. I glanced at Brian. 5. Silence. There are a lot of you, I said, all here to talk about what I'm supposed to give up. Don't be dramatic, my mom snapped. I smiled, not because it was funny, but because the fear in my chest had finally turned into something sharper. You're right, I said. It's not dramatic. It's math. I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and tapped a single word I'd already typed into a draft before I left my condo. Then I set the phone face down next to the pen they'd so thoughtfully provided. Funny thing, I added. You brought 5 people. I only brought 1. A firm knock sounded on the door a few seconds later. The hostess eased it open, and a woman in a navy blazer stepped in, leather folio in hand, expression calmly professional. Good afternoon, Angela, she said. Derek? Then she looked at Brian, unfazed. I'm Priya Shah. I represent Maya regarding her father's estate. I understand you wanted to discuss her inheritance? After that, my mom stopped pretending we were just clearing the air. She went from weepy to icy in the time it took the door to close behind Priya. Brian quickly gathered his papers, muttered something about everyone needing some time to process, and suggested rescheduling if productive. Priya, for her part, calmly slid the unsigned agreement back across the table toward him. We won't be needing this, she said. And for the record, any future discussions about my client's inheritance go through me. Not over brunch, not in private rooms, not with surprises. My mom marched out of the restaurant like someone leaving an open house where the price had just been raised beyond what she could afford. Derek followed, jaw clenched. The teenagers trailed them, eyes wide. Priya and I stayed behind until my hand stopped shaking. You did exactly what you were supposed to do, she said. You showed up, you didn't sign, and you made sure you weren't alone. They don't have a leg to stand on legally. If they try anything else, we'll deal with it. I wanted to believe that was the end. For about 3 days, my phone was quiet. No guilt-drenched paragraphs. No voicemails about family. I almost let myself exhale. Then the messages started again. Shorter, harder, texts about how disappointed she was in the person I'd become. Accusations that my father would be ashamed to see me hoarding money while your siblings struggle. Hints that if I kept being stubborn, I'd regret how complicated things can get with accounts and paperwork. It no longer sounded like someone trying to book another meeting. It sounded like someone planning their next move. I sent everything to Priya. She told me to save every word and not engage. Then she said something that twisted my stomach. If she can't move you emotionally, she may try to move you financially. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and a legal pad by my elbow like my dad used to. I changed every password I had. I enabled 2-factor authentication on every account that offered it. I reset my security questions to answers only I would know. I put a freeze on my credit with all 3 bureaus. It felt paranoid. It also felt like installing locks on a door I'd just realized someone was willing to pick. My dad used to say, in this country, your data is more valuable than your cash. I didn't fully get it until I was hunched over my keyboard, typing new credentials with shaking hands, imagining my mom calmly entering my childhood address into some forgot password B form. A few days later, I got an email that looked exactly like it came from my bank. Same colors, same logo, same kind of subject line. Action needed on your account. Normally, I would have clicked without thinking. This time something felt off. I hovered over the link instead. The domain was almost right. 1 letter off. My skin went cold. I called the number on the back of my debit card instead of touching the email. The representative told me they hadn't sent any security alerts. Then she paused. There has been a failed login attempt from an unfamiliar device on one of your accounts this afternoon, she said. We blocked it, but we recommend you change your password again and enable additional protections. She helped me lock things down further. Ye then suggested I file a fraud report with their security team and a complaint with law enforcement. It felt surreal to sit on my secondhand sofa, TV on mute, and tell a detective over the phone that my own mother might be behind a phishing attempt on my accounts. He told me to also submit everything to the Federal Internet Crime Reporting Portal. That sounded like something people did when hackers overseas stole their crypto, not when their mom lived 200 miles up in 35. Still, I filled it out. Screenshots of the fake email, notes about the timing, the bank's confirmation of attempted access. Priya reviewed the report and told me I'd done the right thing. If this escalates, she said, Dean, we want a record that you took it seriously from the start. The last piece of my lockdown was something I'd never thought much about, my actual front door. I ordered a video doorbell and 2 small Wi-Fi cameras online during my lunch break. They arrived 2 days later in cheerful boxes. Installing them felt like overkill and also like breathing. I walked around the condo, checking the camera feeds on my phone, making sure the lobby mail area and my hallway were covered. For a while, the only alerts were delivery drivers and my neighbor dragging recycling bins past my door. Life went back to something like normal. Work meetings, yoga videos, scrolling through forums at midnight. One of those nights, restless, I posted an anonymous version of my story on an online legal advice forum. I changed names and locations but kept the bones, the inheritance, the pressure, the private room ambush, the fake emails, the replies poured in. People told me to keep trusting my attorney, to never meet with my mom without representation, to treat this like a crime, not a misunderstanding. Dozens of strangers shared versions of their own horror stories about money and family. Reading those responses made one thing clear. I was not crazy. I was not overreacting. I was protecting myself. 2 weeks later, on a random Tuesday afternoon, my phone buzzed in the middle of a dull Zoom stand-up. Motion detected at your front entry. I glanced at the thumbnail. A dark SUV I recognized from countless childhood pickups idled at the curb. Derek's? My heart leapt into my throat. I muted my mic and turned off my camera. Mark mumbling something about a connection issue, then pulled up the live feed. The camera looking toward the parking area showed Derek in the driver's seat, laptop open on his knees, screen glow illuminating his face. A second notification flashed. Motion detected near the mailboxes. The other camera, pointed toward the lobby, showed my mom standing by the mailbox cluster with her phone pressed to her ear, scanning the hallway. Almost immediately, my banking app pushed a banner across the top of my screen. Unrecognized device attempting to access your account. We've blocked this attempt. It felt like watching coordinates line up. My mom at my mailbox, my stepfather in the car outside with a laptop, my bank pinging me about an unauthorized login attempt. I hit record on the camera app and let it run. Later, when I logged into my brokerage account and downloaded the security log, timestamps, IP address, blocked logins. The attempted access time matched the footage down to the minute. I sent it all to Priya. Videos, logs, the earlier phishing email, the federal complaint confirmation. This time she didn't text. She called. This is no longer just harassment, she said. This is attempted identity theft. They're not poking at your boundaries anymore. They're committing crimes. The next day, with her help, I filed a detailed police report. We updated the federal complaint with the new evidence. It felt like crossing a line I could never uncross, but any lingering hesitation evaporated every time I pictured my mom at those mailboxes, eyes darting, one hand on her phone like it was a crowbar. But family drama ended the moment they tried to pretend they were me. For months, I'd felt like I was always reacting one step behind their plans. Now, for the first time, I had something they couldn't spin away with a trembling voice and a Facebook quote about forgiveness. Cold, unforgiving digital proof. And that's how my life ended up playing on a screen in a courtroom. I'd seen courtrooms on TV. The real one in downtown Austin was both smaller and heavier, like the air had soaked up too many bad decisions. I sat at the plaintiff's table next to Priya, fingers wrapped around a styrofoam cup of coffee I'd forgotten to drink, staring at the flat panel monitor across from the judge's bench. That monitor was about to show my front door, my mailbox, and 2 people who thought they were entitled to everything my father had left me. On the other side of the aisle, my mom sat next to Derek. Her hair was perfect, makeup understated, outfit chosen to broadcast responsible professional instead of woman accused of fraud. They'd hired a new attorney, older, smoother, clearly expensive. Lily and Connor were in the second row, dressed neatly, eyes fixed on their shoes. The judge entered. We all rose. My knees felt like they belonged to someone half my age. The prosecutor laid out the case cleanly. Repeated attempts to access protected financial accounts, phishing emails made to look like my bank, a coordinated visit to my residence on the day of a blocked login, video evidence, IP logs. No dramatics, just data. When the monitor flicked on and showed the familiar view from my doorbell, my stomach twisted. There was my lobby, my mailboxes, my mother, who's standing there in a blouse I recognized, phone to her ear, glancing around. A moment later, the feed switched. The street view camera, Derek in the SUV, laptop glowing, fingers on the keyboard. The prosecutor clicked to the next exhibit, a screenshot of my bank's security log, highlighting a failed login attempt from a device associated with Derek's home network. The timestamp in the corner matched the overlay on the video. Next, they showed the phishing email side by side with a legitimate email from my bank. The tiny difference in the URL was circled in red. Their attorney tried to smooth it out. He suggested there had been confusion, that my mother and Derek were trying to assist with account transitions and had simply tried to log into an old joint account. He implied that grief and miscommunication had turned a family misunderstanding into a criminal complaint. He tried, gently, to paint me as overly suspicious, still raw from my father's death. Priya stood and, in her even tone, dismantled that version. She walked through the probate order, showed that none of my father's accounts had ever been joint with my mother after the divorce. She pointed to the timing of the phishing email, the texts about complicated paperwork if I didn't give in, the private room meeting with unsigned agreements. When I took the stand, my job wasn't to perform. It was to tell the story straight, like my dad debugging a problem. And I talked about the inheritance, the constant pressure to share, the threats of ruined credit, the staged family meeting, the surprise lawyer, the unsigned agreement. I explained the sudden fake bank email, the security alerts, changing my passwords, freezing my credit, installing the cameras. Then I described watching the live feed that Tuesday, my mother at the mailboxes, Derek outside in the SUV, my phone buzzing with a login attempt. The prosecutor asked how it felt to see that. Like watching someone try to rip the last tangible piece of my dad out of my hands, I answered, and realizing that person was my own mother. When everyone had finished and all the evidence sat in front of him, the judge took a long time reading. You could hear the air conditioner and the faint shuffle of papers. My mom stared straight ahead. Derek's jaw was locked. Finally, the judge looked up and spoke in the same calm tone he probably used a dozen times a week. He said the evidence showed clear attempts to gain unauthorized access to my accounts using deceptive methods. He pointed out that using personal knowledge, addresses, banks, family details, to impersonate someone isn't a messy family situation. It's fraud. He noted that although no large sums had been successfully drained, intent and effort still mattered. He found my mother and Derek guilty of attempted identity theft and related fraud charges. He didn't throw them in prison for years like a TV show. Real life rarely works that way. Instead, he hit them where it would echo. He handed down a substantial fine, plus restitution covering my legal costs. He put them on supervised probation, he meaning their finances would be watched closely. He ordered them to complete a course on financial crimes. Then he granted the protective order Priya had requested. For 5 years, they were barred from contacting me directly or indirectly, from coming near my home or workplace, or from attempting to access anything tied to my name. Finally, he noted Derek's profession and referred the case to the state board that oversaw financial advisors. I saw the exact second Derek understood that. His shoulders sagged in a way I'd never seen before. No license, no clients, no easy commissions to float the image my mom had been curating online. What surprised me most wasn't the verdict. It was what didn't happen afterward. No tearful confrontation in the hallway. No last-minute speech about blood being thicker than water. When we left the courtroom, my mom stood against the far wall, staring at some invisible point on the floor. The woman who had once curated every detail of her life for an audience suddenly had nothing to post. For years she'd used the word blessed under pictures of backyard pools and champagne flutes. Now she looked like someone who'd finally realized that blessings aren't something you can pry out of your child's hands. I walked past her without stopping. Not because I wanted to twist the knife, but because the judge had already said everything that mattered. For the first time since my dad's accident, the ground under my feet felt like it belonged entirely to me. After the verdict, my life didn't magically turn cinematic. No swelling music, no perfect montage. It got quiet. For the first time in months, the silence in my condo sounded like peace instead of dread. I woke up and reached for my phone, expecting some new disaster. Instead, there were just work emails, calendar reminders, and the usual sales spam. My banking app showed balances, not alerts. My doorbell camera sent me nothing more dramatic than footage of packages arriving, and my upstairs neighbor's dog stopping to sniff the planter outside my door. With the legal fire put out, Priya and I finally sat down one afternoon and went through everything my dad had left. Not as targets or contested territory, but as tools. We shifted some of his carefully picked single stocks into broader index funds, set up a real emergency fund, and mapped out a retirement plan that would have made him quietly smug. When I kept my remote job and stayed in the same condo where we used to eat noodles out of takeout boxes together. Some mornings I'd sit at the little dining table with my laptop and think about how he used to sit in the same chair, spreading printed code reviews out like a paper shield. It hurt, but in a clean, bearable way, like pressing gently on a scar that had finally healed over. Therapy did the rest. I found a counselor who specialized in grief and family betrayal, someone who didn't flinch when I said, "My mom tried to steal my inheritance," out loud. We talked about boundaries, about how families are supposed to be a safety net, not a salvage yard, about how I could carry my dad's memory without carrying my mother's choices on top of it. The knot in my chest loosened bit by bit. I realized I'd spent years trying to fit myself back into a family picture that had been altered without leaving space for me. Letting go of that fantasy hurt less than I expected. It was like waking from a dream where you keep trying to sit down, but there's never a chair. So I found different tables. A local yoga studio where the only thing anyone knew about me was that I always grabbed a mat near the back corner. A women in tech meetup where people traded war stories about deployment disasters, not divorces. Online, I drifted away from doom scrolling into communities that actually tried to help each other. I messaged a moderator from a personal finance forum and asked if I could turn my anonymous legal post into something more structured. Together, we edited it into a guide. How to document financial pressure from relatives, how to protect your online accounts, how to know when a family money conversation has crossed a line. With some of the restitution and a small chunk of my inheritance, I donated to a nonprofit that helps victims of identity theft rebuild their lives. Fixing credit reports, fighting fraudulent accounts, giving people back control. I didn't tell anyone. I just saved the receipt in a folder on my desktop labeled, "For Dad." As for my mother, the consequences did what they were meant to do. The fines and legal bills forced her to sell the big house she once loved to flaunt online. With Derek's license under review, his client list shrank. Their social media posts slowed from another closing and weekend getaway to vague memes about finding out who really cares and starting over. My name never appeared in those posts. The restraining order kept them out of my phone and away from my front porch. Lily and Connor didn't reach out, and I didn't go looking for them. Maybe when they're older and start to question the stories they were told, they'll dig for details. They might resent me, or they might quietly understand. Either way, that's theirs to figure out. People love to say, "But she's your mother," as if biology cancels out everything else. Here's what I learned instead. Sharing DNA doesn't give anyone automatic rights to your future. Love isn't what someone calls it when they're waving a pen over your assets. It's what they do when it would be easier and more profitable not to protect you. My dad's real inheritance wasn't just the condo or the numbers in those accounts. It was the spreadsheet he taught me to build. The insistence on reading the fine print, the belief that integrity matters when no one is checking. It was the courage to sit in a room full of people who thought they could bully me into signing away my security and say calmly, "No." If you've never been dragged into a family fight over money, I hope you never are. But if you're sitting there right now with a sick feeling in your stomach because someone you love is trying to twist your loyalty into leverage, hear me clearly. You are not selfish for protecting what's yours. You are not cruel for setting hard boundaries. You are not a bad daughter or son for refusing to be scammed by someone who happens to share your last name. In a world where your entire life can be reduced to passwords and account numbers, the most valuable thing you own is the ability to say, "This stops here." My mom tricked me into a family meeting, thinking she'd talk me into signing away what my dad left me. What she never understood was that the most important thing he left me wasn't in any account. It was the knowledge that real family protects your future. They don't try to steal it.